Given all of this, I want to be very clear. From the beginning of this crisis, there has not been a single idea for addressing the Syria conflict that has been discussed in public that hasn't been the subject of intense scrutiny within the administration. Whatever questions one might have about the content of our policy, there should be no doubt about the effort made to consider every single option for ending this crisis. That explains why the United States originally supported the deployment of international human rights monitors to Syria, why our UN ambassador, Samantha Power, led the fight in the Security Council to demand access for humanitarian relief agencies and for an investigation into war crimes by the International Criminal Court. And it is why we have been at the forefront of every single attempt to forge a diplomatic solution from the day I know that I became Secretary of State. It's why we have been in regular contact from the outset with mainstream Syrian opposition groups, meeting with them repeatedly, helping them in ways both public and private, and encouraging them to unify and take steps to broaden their support. It is why we have worked hard to mitigate the incredible burden the war has placed on Syria's neighbors, on Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. Excuse me, not Iran, Iraq. And in each case, we have coordinated closely with the government in order to prevent the violence from spreading and to help them cope with the massive influx of refugees that has now spread even beyond their own region into the heart of Europe. To date, as was mentioned, we have proudly contributed more than $4.5 billion in humanitarian relief, and we are constantly exhorting other countries to open their wallets, because even as another winter closes in, the need for help far outweighs the supply. In addition, we have announced a six-fold increase in the number of Syrian refugees that we will welcome to our shores in the United States. In addition to all this, the United States led a successful international effort to eliminate Syria's inventory of chemical weapons. Now, when Assad attacked his own people with these horrific weapons, banned by international law, President Obama's threat of military strikes forced the Syrian regime to back down and enabled us to strike a deal with Russia and other members of the UN Security Council. As a result, for the first time in history, weapons of mass destruction were removed from a country while that country was engaged in a conflict. And let me tell you something. It is a plenty good thing that that happened, because you can only imagine the devastation the leaders of Daesh could have been able to wreak if they had gotten their hands on Syria's arsenal of sophisticated lethal chemical arms. Now, I emphasize this because the list of crimes for which Daesh is responsible is already numbing. These thugs aren't just terrorists. They're also smugglers, kidnappers, raw criminals. They butcher teachers, burn books, wage war on knowledge itself. They execute journalists for doing their jobs, and average citizens, not for anything that they have said or done, but simply for who they are, for what they believe about religion and God. In Iraq, Daesh fighters have been abducting, raping, and auctioning off women and girls, even teaching that the abuse of underage non-Muslim girls is not only acceptable, but a form of prayer, an expression of the will of God. That is how perverse this has become. And they have urged followers and affiliates from across the globe to murder their neighbors, to commit homicides and suicide at the same time. This past summer, terrorists picked up sledgehammers and smashed half a dozen statues in the ancient city of Palmyra. They destroyed the 1,800-year-old Roman arch and temples that were even more venerable. They seized the city's director of antiquities, made him kneel in a public square, cut off his head, and left his body tied to a pole. Man was 83 years old, and he had been in charge of preserving Palmyra's cultural heritage for more than 50 years. It couldn't be plainer. History doesn't matter to Daesh. Human dignity doesn't matter to Daesh. And the sacredness of life itself is alien to Daesh. Their leaders represent everything that we fought against from World Wars I and II to today, and everything that we have tried to build up that is right and good in all of our societies. And in confronting them, we face a fight against medieval and modern fascism at the same time. Let me be clear. This isn't just a fight that we must make on behalf of others, as important as that is at times. The United States does not go in search of enemies, but there are times when enemies come in search of us. And we know for a fact that Daesh means what it says when it threatens to attack America and attack Americans and attack America's interests. So the stakes could not be higher. Under President Obama's leadership, the United States has mobilized a 65-member coalition to take on Daesh and defeat Daesh. And notwithstanding whatever you read recently about people diverted with other interests, yeah, there are other conflicts too, but they remain committed, deeply committed, and at the table in Vienna, helping to broker a solution. We have said from the beginning that this would be a multi-year effort. But as I will describe in a couple of minutes, we are on the right track, and we are making gains, and we are clear about the road ahead. My friends, the Syrian civil war has dragged on now for more than 4.5 years. We recall with sadness that civil war in neighboring Lebanon lasted for 16. Regrettably, this is not a part of the world where flames, once ignited, simply extinguish themselves. The intractable nature of the conflict in Syria is attributable to a number of factors, beginning with the Assad government. The 4 decades of dictatorial rule choked off any attempt to develop an organized political opposition. Sectarian differences that might have worked themselves out peacefully in a more open society instead festered beneath the surface. And the forces unleashed by the Arab Spring emerged so suddenly that the collision between rising alarm on one side and skyrocketing expectations on the other was much more traumatic than otherwise might have been the case. The situation was further complicated by the involvement of regional actors, especially Hezbollah, which intervened on behalf of Assad and the foreign terrorist fighters who have joined Daesh and other terrorist groups and members of the IRGC who crossed an international border to become involved in this fight. We face an environment now that bears little resemblance to the kind of black and white scenarios that make decisions relatively easy. Put simply, there are bad guys all around and good guys who are not accustomed to working with each other. But the dominant truth about the situation in Syria is that although Assad and Daesh are supposed to be bitter opponents, they are both parts of the same problem. In fact, the rise of Daesh is directly attributable to the policies and actions of the Assad regime. And that is why we have referred to Assad as a magnet for terrorism. This is a case, and there are many in history, in which 2 supposed enemies are in fact symbolic. Loathing towards Assad drove thousands of Syrians into the arms of Daesh. And fear of Daesh caused some Syrian groups to feel that they had no realistic option but to support the government. That's not just symbolic, that's a symbiotic relationship, each piece dependent on the other. And the desire to flee both explains the massive refugee crisis that we face today. The relationship between Assad and Daesh clarifies one of the apparent peculiarities of this conflict, that the 2 extremes have only rarely targeted one another. Think about that. In fact, they even do business with each other, buying and selling oil. Assad and Daesh are enemies far more in theory than in fact. and neither has shown any interest in bringing the killing to an end. If neither the dictator nor the terrorists are the answer, and they are not, our challenge is to create conditions under which a clear and broadly acceptable alternative can emerge. To that end, President Obama has set for our nation 3 interrelated goals. We begin with Daesh. Some 14 months ago, the President made it clear that the United States was committed to the defeat and dismantlement of this terrorist organization. And over the last month, he has directed every member of his national security team to pick up the pace and move forward with ideas for degrading and defeating Daesh more rapidly, more completely, and permanently. Second, we are intensifying our diplomatic effort to finally bring an end to the civil war in Syria. And third, we are determined to support our friends in the region and to ensure that the instability created by the Syrian crisis does not spread further beyond its borders. Now, these measures are mutually reinforcing. The more progress we make on one, the more likely we are to succeed on the others. President Obama has made his view clear that the crisis in Syria cannot be resolved militarily, and that remains the case. But it's also clear that the chance for successful diplomacy depends in part on the ability to exert leverage, on control of territory, on perceptions about who is gaining or has the upper hand. That's why it matters that there is increasing evidence in both Iraq and Syria that Daesh can be defeated, even routed, when faced by the combination of coalition airstrikes and effective partners on the ground. Remember, this coalition has only been together for 14 months. People forget that. Last summer, it did not even exist. But the coalition has already made a huge difference in reversing Daesh's momentum and in saving people's lives. And the evidence is there for everybody to see. To date, the coalition has launched more than 8,000 airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, and the number is rising every day. There were more than 40 just last night. The coalition and its allies on the ground have defended Mosul Dam and other vital facilities in Iraq, while also preventing a terrorist assault on Baghdad. We've driven Daesh from the critical border town of Kobani, everybody predicting it was going to fall and how terrible that would be. Well, it didn't fall. And it didn't fall because we stepped up and the President ordered the strikes, and we reinforced and we provided ammunition and capacity, and people were able to fight back. We've seen the city of Tikrit liberated, enabling most of its population, about 100,000 people, to return and start to rebuild their communities. With its partners, the coalition helped to rescue an endangered minority on Sinjar Mountain, and today, as we sit here, Allied forces are engaged in a major operation to liberate Sinjar itself, cut off Highway 47, which is Daesh's main artery from Syria into Iraq. We've also established a robust program, including the deployment of thousands of American advisors to train and assist Iraqi security forces. We have significantly degraded Daesh's top leadership, including Haji Mutaz, the organization's second in command, and we continue to eliminate commanders and other personnel from the battlefield. Overall, Daesh is unable to operate in 20 to 25% of the territory it controlled a year ago. And we are just getting started. We now know more about the enemy than we did, and we know more about what has worked and what has not worked and what can work. And so, at the President's direction, and with those lessons in mind, we are stepping up our strategy in all its aspects. In Iraq, we are supplying our partners with the help that they need in the form of armored bulldozers and mine-clearing equipment to break down the Daesh defenses around the key city of Ramadi. In fact, as I speak, Iraqi forces are engaged in a systematic but carefully calibrated effort to encircle and retake that city. Meanwhile, another Iraqi force, recently took back the Baiji oil refinery, which is strategically located on the road linking Baghdad and Mosul. In Syria, we have increased the shipment of supplies and ammunition to moderate opposition forces fighting Daesh. And the President has authorized the deployment of a small number of U.S. Special Forces in an advisory role to help them in this fight. We are encouraging our European allies to do more, and they are. We are increasing our operational tempo out of Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, flying more often and to greater effect. We joined with our Kurdish partners in a daring rescue operation that saved the lives of 79 Daesh prisoners who were about to be executed one by one. We remain in constant communication with our Arab friends who are fully supportive of our goals and continue to participate in coalition efforts, which are not just military, but also include putting relentless pressure on Daesh's finances, on its ability to attract foreign recruits, and on countering its message of division and hate using all of the media available to do so. We're also providing additional assistance to enhance the security capabilities of Jordan and Lebanon. And these efforts are paying off. Not long ago, Daesh controlled more than half of Syria's 500-mile-long border with Turkey. Today, it has a grip on only about 15%, and we have a plan with our partners to pry open and secure the rest, and we will. We are striving with local forces to put the squeeze on Raqqa, the center of Daesh's operations. We have hit some of the organization's key energy facilities, including just recently the Omar oil field, from which the terrorists derive both revenue and fuel. And we have made Daesh change the way that it moves and operates, because its leaders now get up each morning worrying about what might come down from the sky. All of this and more is part of a strategy to continue building on what has worked and to apply pressure against Daesh from as many directions as possible, with as much intensity as possible, for as long as it takes.